So I think recording has started. So good evening, all of you, and welcome to our speaker, Professor Ajay Gudavarthy, and he is an associate professor of Center for Political Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has done his MA, MPhil, and PhD in the same center and in the same institution. So before joining JNU as an assistant professor, he has served as an assistant professor uh, at the National Law School of India, Bangalore, and he has served as an assistant professor at the Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. He has served as a lecturer at the National University of Juridical Science, Calcutta. Along these, he is the coordinator of the Human Rights Center, NUJS, Calcutta, and is the coordinator of National Institute of Human Rights, NLSIU, Bangalore, and he is the referee for EPW, SAGE, Indian Journal of Public Administration, Social Science, Studies in Indian Politics, and Cambridge and Routledge, etc. So beside these, he has many achievements. One may see his CV that is available in the Google. He has published 8 books on the themes like democracy, civil society, globalization, cultural politics, populism, secular sectarianism, New India, etc. So recently I got to know from his Facebook page that his book on populism is there in the reading list of a course on authoritarianism at London School of Economics. His book on Maoism and populism are essential reading for the course on India and the problems of post-colonial democracy at University of Warwick. So it is not required to mention that he has published n number of research papers and articles in different journals since 1996, and he has presented many research papers since 2000 onwards on different forums. So far as as fellowships and awards are concerned, he has got many fellowships and awards, and some of the notable are Charles Wallace Visiting Fellowship and Visiting Fellow in the Center for Citizenship, University of Aberdeen. So he has successfully completed 6 research projects, and above all, he is a great asset to the world of academics. Today, I have given the assignment, I have assigned my student Sanjay. Sanjay is working on populism. He is my MPhil student, so I assigned to introduce the theme of today's talk. So Sanjay, you may start now.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. First of all, namaste, sir. It's really a great privilege for me to introduce the topic that is the future of populism in India. In recent times, we see populism all around us. Now it has become a buzzword in politics. No political parties or leaders escape from the politics of populism. But its precise definitions remain elusive. From a democratic point of view, the ambivalence is already apparent in the term populism. Its root is the Latin word populus, which means the people, which exhibits a clear link with the democratic idea. In other words, where there is democracy, there is always populism. On the other hand, the suffix ism signals ideological potentiation in contrast to the moderate character of today's democracies. Some dictionaries defines populism as a political philosophy that favors the right of the people as opposed to those of elites. It represents the people as a morally good force and contrasts them against the elite who are portrayed as corrupt and self-serving. Contextually, the populism implies a strong attention of power and by character, extremely personalized and a major weapon for political propaganda and power manipulation. Populist leaders not only promise good things to everybody, Even though to be a merchant of dreams is an important part of their politics, they also articulate a political style. They not only appeal to the masses and play with their emotions, but also promise to address their concerns. They keep promising happy days to come. अच्छे दिन आएंगे. Populist claim to represent the people, and this stance places them above any institutions, including the judiciary, because they identify directly with the people's sentiments, sense of justice and morality. John Warner Muller names these as moral monopoly of representation, and this is and it is this posture that makes populist inherently dangerous. The openness of the populist challenge to pluralism makes them much more dangerous than more overt enemies of democracy. However, Ernesto Loclau presents populism as an emancipatory social force through which marginalized groups challenge to dominant power structures. It invokes an idea of the masses of common people who are excluded from or have access to privilege and embody alternative cultural traditions. In contrast, populism in popular parlance in India is used to refer to virtually any policy that is redistributive in nature. Instead of being growth oriented, this is particularly true when such a policy is announced before impending elections. Since the late 19th century, populism has played a vital role in different phases of Indian history, particularly in mobilizing emergent groups and bringing about different movements and civil society initiatives. Populism has coexisted with several different ideological strands and yet influenced a range of policies with its discourse and mobilizations. The term populism is generally used by the press in India to refer the indiscriminate use of populism, public resources to give goods away to voters. With these connotations of crowd-pleasing politics, populism has now become a pejorative term. After knowing these, several questions arises to my mind. In contemporary Indian politics, populist schemes and persona do matter. Whether populist schemes identify the party or the party is identified by the populism. Secondly, how the populism has restructured the voting behavior. Thirdly, how it is an alternative to the neoliberal critique to the democratic institutions. And fourthly, what are the different modes of populist politics? To what extent it is for good or bad? If it is good, then what is the future of populist mobilizations? And if it is bad, then what is the alternative to the populism? Over to you, Himanshu, sir.
So thank you, Sanjay. I think you have said many things, and today expert on that theme is before us, and I request and I expect the expert will use some lucid language, and we want an understanding on populism, on populist, whether it is good, bad, what is the concept of popular, then populism, populist. So with such an introduction, I once again welcome Professor Gudavarthy to start his talk. So please, sir, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Himanshu, for this invite. Always a pleasure to interact with students. Ideally, I would have wanted to come to Sambalpur and visit your university. Maybe I hope I'll get some opportunity soon to be amidst your students. I would be interested in interaction. Of course, I will speak and introduce few things, but I will be very keen to listen to your students. I think Sanjay has done already a great job introducing the basic concepts, and he has also framed very relevant and useful questions. So at the heart of it, populism is a very thin concept. Conceptually, it's a very concept. It fundamentally refers to a certain crisis in representation in liberal democracies. Therefore, it imagines, populism is a certain kind of an alternative imagination of representation, alternative way of how democracies can work, which runs very close to the idea of direct democracy. Therefore, in populism, there are two things. The kind of questions Ajay posed are very relevant. Therefore, this idea of direct democracy, what does it mean? It means that there is an unmediated relation between an authentic, homogeneous people and a leader. So people en masse imagine that they have faith on a single leader who is both accountable as well as a leader who will deliver the promise, circumventing the institutional complexities that exist between, let's say, separation of power, the way it introduces between executive, legislature, and judiciary, procedurals, law, rule of law, all of this. So, populism is at the heart of a certain conflicting tension between liberalism and democracy. The political philosopher Chantal Mouffe now argues that liberalism, democracy coexisting together is only a historical contingency. So it was only an element of chance that Western Enlightenment and industrialization brought liberalism and democracy together. But beyond that, there is nothing to guarantee that liberalism will lead to democracy or democracy will lead to liberal values. So what we are witnessing today is in fact this tension between liberalism and democracy. That as democracies are deepening, the question that should be interesting to us is that as democracies are deepening, in the sense of representation is deepening to sections that in the past did not have that representation. In the Indian context, one can talk about sub-Dalit groups, sub-OBC groups. We are talking about gender, 33% reservation, so on and so forth. But as democratization is leading to deepening and expanding of representation, one can conclude that democracy is healthy. But as deepening of democracy is happening, those democracies are rejecting liberalism. Earlier, we imagined that liberalism and democracy will go together, that the more there is participation, more people are included in the decision making, more will be the diversity, and because of that diversity there will be more liberal values in society. Liberal values of tolerance, respecting minority rights, respecting rule of law, respecting democratic institutions, respecting electoral processes, so on and so forth. But what is it that can explain this strange anomaly? That growing spirit, growing imagination, expanding representation of democracy is leading to entrenched crisis of liberalism. The more societies are becoming democratic through representation, the more illiberal are the democracies becoming. Is it because the earlier form of representation did not deliver? This is the question Sanjay raised. So is it good or bad? Is populism leading to something good for society or something bad? So this is the quandary. That populism in one sense represents the popular imagination, popular views, everyday ethics. They are inclusive of emotions. They are highly symbolic. So in this sense, I would say populism is democratic. That it speaks to a people. It attempts to represent the popular, dominant, available narratives, symbols, values, so on and so forth. But this does not necessarily mean that all those values, those ethics are liberal in character. So popular and progressive need not go together. What is popular, what is dominant in terms of imagination need not necessarily be progressive. In fact, this has something to, therefore, how do we explain this quandary? How do you explain this strange anomaly that increasing democratization is leading to increasing illiberalism, increasing intolerance? Therefore, populisms, as Mueller says, are essentially anti-pluralist, they are authoritarian, so on and so forth. Another scholar, Dutch scholar, Cas Made, he makes a very great formulation that populism is nothing but a democratic illiberal response to undemocratic liberalism. Democratic illiberal response to undemocratic liberalism. That is, there is some irreducible tension between popular mobilizations, process of representation, and liberal values. So if you look at our own history, colonial rule in India was, since it was not representative, it gained its legitimacy through principles like rule of law. While anti-colonial movement gained its representation through popular politics, popular representation, and participation. When we had independence, the colonial modernity and the liberalism which it had was merged with sovereignty, and therefore the constitution making process was some kind of an amalgamation of these two elements of our history. But do they go together? Because we have to know, democracy, while domination can be structural, democracy has to be a very lived spirit. People have to, democracy would mean, as Ambedkar, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar rightly reminded us, has no meaning if it does not go with social equality. It does not go with economic equality. Our problem is we have had representation without social equality, without economic equality, without respect for rule of law. So this is a very strange, forefathers, constitutional makers, as Dr. again, Baba Sahib Ambedkar warned us, constitutional morality, which basically means liberty, equality, participation, dignity for all, mutual respect, so on and so forth, is not available in a caste-based society like India with a ladder-like structure. Therefore, Ambedkar said constitutional morality has to be constructed and it is not readily available. He also warned us that democracy will be ineffective if it does not achieve social and economic equality. I think he has been a great foresight that what Baba Sahib Ambedkar in one sense predicted, it is coming true. So the question we have to ask is, what is popular? What are popular ethics in India? Are they democratic in nature? What is everyday ethics? Therefore, populism, study of populism will bring new variables that generally political scientists and social scientists have not used in the past. Our study of democracy, like Rajni Kothari, Rudolph and Rudolph, Atul Kohli, all these writers that we study have studied democracy through institution framework, have studied through policy framework, have studied through electoral studies, we have studied democracy through economic history, so on and so forth. Populism is bringing altogether a new set of variables to understand in terms of that popular imagination, everyday ethics, emotions. All these are determining how democracy works. And all of them, unfortunately, in the present context, are working in terms of creating illiberal, anti-pluralist, authoritarian and majoritarian social and political orders, as we are witnessing in India currently. So we have to take Mueller's voice seriously in terms of why populists are prone to be majoritarian, because they believe in mobilizing an authentic population. So in white America, it is white population for Trump. In Turkey, it is Muslims. In India, it could be Hindus. So the demographic, ethnic thing differs, but they're all based on mobilizing an authentic. So it is easy to like Mueller and Madej arguing that they're authoritarian, but I take a slightly different view in my writings of populism in India. That while overtly I agree that Indian populists turn to India in the last 10 years or so has created greatly illiberal democracy, authoritarian structures, undermining of institutions has happened in India, undermining law is happening, as we can see in Uttar Pradesh, disrespect for rule of law, encouraging encounters. So all these are phenomena of a populist popular opinion. But having said that, one should not throw the baby with bathwater. So what is good is what you have, Sanjay, you have quoted in terms of Laclau's argument on populist reasoning. That Laclau's point is that populism is about a way of doing politics, of bringing in highly complex, heterogeneous, segregated, differentiated societies like India, when all the groups become active. So I see populism is also a response to today almost all social groups which were earlier totally marginalized are today invested in democracy. Smallest of Dalit groups, smallest of OBCs, Muslims in very big number, women. You can see that how women have emerged as an independent constituency across India, from Uttar Pradesh to Bihar. We have women-centric policies of prohibition, welfare policies, so on and so forth. But what has happened is this process of political democratization has come with neoliberalism. So populism is also a response to this widening gap between two phenomena. One, neoliberalism that is creating tremendous amount of economic exclusion, high rates of inequality, centralization of capital, spread of imperialism, so on and so forth. But that is coming along with democratic representation. So populism is a way of managing this crisis. More inequalities, but more participation. More social inequalities, but greater representation. So it is throwing up an authoritarian figure like Yogi, like Mr. Modi, who try to manage these things that are pulling in two different directions through their personality, through their oratory skills, through the way they evoke emotions, the way they appeal to popular sentiments, so on and so forth. So the way we need to approach populism, therefore, as we said, this title, Future of Populism, therefore, is about how do we retain this democratic element in the expansion of representation. Because if you outrightly critique populism, there is a danger of it becoming elitist. That is why liberalism is in crisis today, because liberalism by default became the concern of elites. So one should not jump and immediately the complexity that we should frame is that how do we therefore retain this democratic spirit that is available in our society today, where all social groups, today Muslims have been completely marginalized and cornered, but still they are heavily invested in democracy. They are responding to their social condition of marginalization through democratic participation, by voting, by non-violent peaceful protests like Shaheen Bagh against CAA and so forth. This is the strength of our democracy, that people are heavily invested in democracy. They have not lost faith in democratic mobilization, non-violent civil disobedience, forms of protest. But their faith in institutions, their faith in courts, their faith in liberal processes has dramatically reduced. So the question we should raise in terms of future of populism is, how do we retain this democratic spirit without condemning it, and yet lead and appropriate it in a way that it does not create majoritarian, authoritarian, anti-pluralist, illiberal political order? Can we do it? That is the question. Or is it that we have to get reconciled to this fact that when democracy spreads and deepens, when different social groups come together, then their prejudices, because prejudice is a matter of fact in India. We are all socialized into prejudice through caste, through religious history. We have had a bloody history of Hindu-Muslim conflicts. We are a highly misogynist society in terms of gender. We are highly conservative in terms of sexual minorities, so on and so forth. So it's obvious that when democracy has started to reflect the opinion of all these groups, then so democracy will look more illiberal. So is it a solution then to disallow these groups from participating so that we create a liberal, superimpose a liberal constitutional order? That is what in a sense has been happening. That you had some liberal constitutional order that talked about pluralism, secularism, but it was not a lived reality. People continue to have their prejudices, people continue to have their conservatism, people continue to have their... So the question is, can this democratic spirit of participation be turned on its head in a way that it can also create social and economic equality? For instance, today, smallest groups, subgroups of Dalits, subgroups of OBCs are participating in greater number, coming out of the hegemony of both dominant caste Hindus as well as dominant groups within their caste. So OBCs today are protesting against upper caste, but they're also protesting against the domination of dominant Yadavs, so on and so forth. Similar thing is happening with Dalit groups. This is a very democratic process. They are breaking old patron-client relations, old relations of patronage, old relation of spoil system, old relation of fear and violence. So our political representation process is allowing that. Even BJP had to do that with all its conservatism. It had to approach. And today we are finding that since they were unhappy with Yogi's rule, how those groups have moved away from BJP, Maurya and so on and so forth. So this is the functional, vibrant aspect of our political representation. But the problem with our democracy is it's limited to that. It is not getting converted into larger ethics of social equality and redistributive justice. So in my own writings, I've tried to argue that we should not be in a rush to condemn populism or completely reject it in total. When people in differentiated social groups come together, they will bring their prejudices, and that is the reason why there is the rise of illiberal democracies. Now the question is, can we use the same democratic process to create a kind of a liberalism that is also based on social and economic equality. Our earlier form of liberalism in India was not based on social and economic equality. So it is possible for us to read that something new is happening in the Indian democratic context. One should not be short-sighted to read this as the that it's only leading to fascism and this and that. Well, that might be one of the designs of the ruling party, that they have scant respect. But we have to read the context correctly. As Chantal Mouffe says, the connection between democracy and liberalism is contextual. I would argue the relation between illiberalism and populism is also contingent. Populism need not necessarily only get represented as illiberal, authoritarian, and anti-democratic. This therefore has something to do with neoliberalism and social inequalities. If you observe closely, populism is also responsible in terms of welfare policies. Populism is having those kind of an affirmative, reformistic welfare. Populism is also keeping the question of justice, equality on the agenda. In my own writings, therefore, I have argued that what we should be looking at is third democratic upsurge. India has had two democratic upsurges. The anti-colonial upsurge was one. Second was the OBC reservations in 1990s, bringing in the category of Bahujans, very big number, intermediate caste into democratic process, welfare net. That was the second democratic process. But what these processes have done is that they have led to formation of caste-specific policies, caste-specific, religious-specific policies. So part of our crisis is that social, secular and welfare policies have led to social ghettoization. Social distance between groups has not transformed in India in any meaningful, substantive way. If we can combine welfareism with populism, large-scale institutional guarantee of basic income, basic health, free and compulsory education for all. Welfareism, not this kind of regional transactional welfareism, giving sanitary pad to girls, giving bicycles to girls, giving nipples to newly born kids. Not this kind of transactional welfareism, but what I call as structural welfareism. A good example of this is free, fair, common school quality education for all. Like common neighborhood schooling system that we have in United States. If we can link the participatory spirit of populism with structural welfareism, we can move in a new direction. We will then be able to address the question of social inequalities and social prejudices that have got fossilized. We should then be able to redefine secularism, not in terms of social identities being rigid, Muslims having separate personal laws, Hindus having something else, caste configurations. All of this we need to raise these questions. But everything cannot be legitimized in the search for identity. Identity politics and neoliberalism go together. Therefore, we will also have to look beyond identity politics. So if we can have some kind of structural welfareism, structural in the immediate context, I'm talking about basic income scheme for all, basic employment for all, and education is going to be an extremely important institution. That's the reason we see current regime is creating havoc in higher education, not just JNU. Entire higher education today, India is starved of funds. It is being neglected, poor appointments, because education, higher education has created a major threat to traditional caste-based hierarchical imagination. So what are the probabilities that we can work towards? I don't think that can happen if you simply take the Mueller and the Casmade kind of line and simply dismiss populism as just equate it with majoritarianism and authoritarianism. While that propensity exists, we have to accept that propensity exists. I don't think we should dismiss. We'll have to agree that that propensity, authoritarian illiberal, is also emerging because of neoliberal. The nature of aspirational anxiety that neoliberalism has created has also pushed populism towards illiberality. Therefore, in terms of sociological understanding, I think everyday ethics, everyday emotions of people are always flexible. They are always open to multiple significations. One cannot say people with a conviction that Indian people are completely illiberal and conservative, because there are so many contexts where they demonstrate open mind, transformative, they're accommodative, they're compassionate, including in the recent Delhi riots. There was n number of cases of Hindus shielding and giving protection to Muslims. So there is a lot of sociological misreading, I think, has happened in Indian scholarship, especially on last 10 years. I've argued in my own writings that there is no Islamophobia in India. What we have is contextual communalism, that is, contextually people get segregated. Of course, there is a sustained campaign to create hatred towards Muslims, but that ethics are open. People are ethically, normatively open, because people are normative, people are pragmatic. People are prone to hatred, people are also capable of compassion. So if this is our understanding, then populism need not only exclusively be only illiberal. It depends on many other factors. Therefore, I'm saying that much of illiberality is cultural, but it is also because of neoliberal anxieties. If we can provide a large structural welfare net, there is no reason why India should not come out of this kind of a majoritarian impasse. We will have to link the compassion, openness that exists in Indian ethical, cultural, social fabric with structural welfareism in order to create what I refer to as a third democratic upsurge. This third democratic upsurge we have to reimagine in terms of cross-class, cross-caste, cross-region, cross-gender social solidarities. It cannot be an identity-based exclusive. What identity politics have done, they have asserted, brought in certain issues, but they have also neglected a range of issues. We are discussing in my optional course how identity politics do not take redistributive issues into account. Therefore, we'll have to reimagine the social relations between communities in India altogether. We have to push the way. One of the best examples of this has been the recent past has been the farmers movement. How farmers movement, being a rich peasant, Jat, brought in the Dalit question, brought in the landless question, critiqued the corporate development model, encouraged women's participation, created women leaders, brought in Muslims. They had an open panchayat where they apologized to Muslims for their role in Muzaffarnagar in 2013. That is, I think, a nascent form in which cross-community solidarities can emerge. That is the reason I have been critical even of movements like Shaheen Bagh, that in spite of these movements resisting, there was a reason why they emerged, but where they fail is in terms of creating a social identification between communities. So this is where we'll have to move towards new ideas of how do we create identification, emotional, psychological, social identification between communities. We'll have to raise new conceptual questions. When communities demand recognition, does it also constitute prejudice against other communities? How do you differentiate between prejudice and recognition? Indian society has to now more openly confront this question of how do we eliminate and fight and resist prejudices, everyday prejudices, caste, religion, gender. This has to become part of our electoral democratic debate. This is not to be left to civil society. Political mobilization cannot be only on issues of, cycle, bicycle, who distributes what. But in Indian context, as Dr. Ambedkar very rightly said, in India, social revolution has to precede economic revolution. We have to take on the cultural question head on. Like rise of BSP meant nothing. It gave a category of Bahujan, but it never negotiated or gave us an alternative how to deal with violence between OBCs and Dalits in India, or between Dalits and Muslims in India. So our political experiments have not translated into viable social strategies. What third democratic upsurge I'm imagining, or as a future of populism, is in terms of forging this larger social solidarity. So solidarity and populism. Social solidarity on the social domain, populist political participation on the political domain, and structural welfareism on the economic domain. If we are able to bring these three dimensions together, that is where I feel there is a great possibility of India moving towards a new kind of a social democratic model, like something close to Scandinavian welfare state model that is inclusive, and that is where we can also defeat the authoritarian, illiberal tendencies of populism. I'll stop here, Himanshu, and would love to hear your students and their questions.
So thank you very much. I mean, you gave us a perspective. What should be the meaning of populist or populism? And you beautifully said it, that how this populism is contributing to the crisis between the liberalism and democracy, right? And you said that you are not understanding populism the way some political parties do, by giving something this or that. That's not the populism. Or populism has a greater role to play. So I think students perhaps they understood the crisis of representation, the populism as an alternative imagination, how there is a infighting between liberalism and democracy, how deepening democracy is also contributing to the losing of liberal values, increase of representative democracy, there is also the increase of illiberal values. And in that context, I think the way you justify populism, it gives a different, it gives a very strong need of the hour. What I can say that we should, there's a alternative, gentle Mofi, the radical democracy, the alternative mode of democracy. So I think the suggestion also what you have given these three-level suggestion, I think that can give us some hope to the common people. They may feel that that this democracy is for them. So I think, thank you very much. I mean, you did an excellent job, and I'm happy. I think now I may there are some faculties with us now. Professor Gyanaranjan Swai, so he is the faculty of Gangadhar Meher University in Sambalpur. So he is among us. Now I want him to give his comment, observation, or anything.
Somebody has raised Aditya. Is it Aditya from Aditya Mohanty?
Yes, sir.
Aditya, there are many people have raised, and some in the chat box also, I think, Himanshu.
I'll go back to it later. Professor Swai, are you there? Okay, Aditya, you can ask.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Gudavarthy, for this. I would really, I mean, it would be an understatement to say it's an excellent talk, but I would rather say it was a very measured reading of populism, to be very honest, sir. Thanks a lot for this, interpretation that you've given. Let me before I get into the question, I'll have to ask you, sir, a very important, I'll put a small, quick context of the question that I'm asking. One is that it is very difficult for many liberal scholars, I mean, including myself, that people have very few people have the stomach to digest what you really properly put up, that Modi's version of populism is not all that bad. I mean, there are something good things also about it, and we cannot necessarily color it through tainted through this cultural hue. And in line with that, in your writings also, you have written, I mean, clearly, and others have also articulated that populism, of course, hasn't popped up in India in 2010. It was there with different versions. Indira Gandhi was also populist of her own kind. Mayawati was populist of her own kind. In the South also, you have appeasement politics, and even right now, Kejriwal is also seen to be populist in his own way, that when he does electricity subsidy. So everyone has his or her own version of populism. So my questions then are twofold, sir. First, can then populism be regarded as a exaggerated version of appeasement politics? One. And the second one is, if yes, so depending on how you read it, whether it can be seen as a bigger appeasement politics, then how do we differentiate between the left liberal, Dalit, right wing, and socialist versions of populism? Because for someone like you who's very good authority on political history of India, so because one problem I had in one of your formulations, you told that in the constitution, even such kind of tensions between the popular reading of constitution and the colonial anti-colonial struggle was there, and we know very well that even in the Constitutional Assembly debates, there were many voices which were silenced. We do admit to the fact that there were certain people took on, and so fine, and that's why that's why every time even the liberals say that the best way to govern is to go by the spirit of the constitution. Even Modi and group also say that we go by the spirit of constitution. God knows whatever versions of constitution they have. But then, so sir, without digressing the focus of the question, just to summarize one last time, that whether populism is an exaggerated version of appeasement, and how do we differentiate between the different avatars of populism that India has seen? Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Aditya. I mean, Aditya asked a very strong question, a strong observation. So I request Professor Ajay to respond it, then subsequently we'll take other questions.
Yeah. So thanks, Aditya, for this question. So I really do not know in what context you're using this idea of exaggerated appeasement, but the way I see what I call, that dimension of populism that we need to carefully kind of appropriate and and stay with, is that if you observe closely, this round of authoritarian right-wing populism is riding on the social ghettos that our secular politics have created, which is what I have coined in my own writings as secular sectarianism. That sectarianism created within caste order, between dominant caste within OBCs and rest of the caste groups within OBCs. So this is a very anomalous very strange. It's a historical, divine intervention that we are loosening up these rigid social boundaries through this kind of a conservative force that is playing radical role. So I call it democratization by default. That they are loosening up of caste ties. They are loosening up of caste ties between caste Hindus and Dalits, within OBCs. Very interestingly, they are also raising questions that were considered to be taboo, like the gender question within religious minorities. Of course, they are doing it to construct a majoritarian order. This is where I'm saying that populism lends itself to both these dimensions. What the right is doing is building a populist consent for a majoritarian, monolithic, theocratic state. I don't think we need to have any doubt in terms of what this regime is about. They are therefore raising right questions, legitimate questions for illegitimate. So they're actually showing you how both these dimensions coexist in Indian democratic mobilization. Questions that should have come up by themselves in our democratic mobilization in last 3 decades, and that did not, because of the way we have formulated our idea of secularism. So there's a power cut, but I'll continue to speak. You may not be able
yeah, you can.
able to hear me. So yeah, so therefore our secular, in that sense, this response, I mean, if you meant, I don't know in what sense you use appeasement, but in this sense, I think of building the social ghettos, what the current regime by default is doing is loosening up of those social hierarchies in a rhetorical sense. I think we should therefore not throw with bathwater. So this whole, for instance, hijab debate, whatever individual positions we might take, what we'll have to accept at the basic level is that there is a gender question within minority rights, within minority groups. And one has to articulate it and put it. In the way we have resolved it through personal laws, I think it was unfair to Muslim women. Similarly, question of gender within caste. So I think this group, this current populist regime on left democratic front, we talk about intersectionality. What the current populist regime has done is to activate all conflictual points. They are generating conflicts. They are generating micro conflicts all across social groups. So I think I see it's a possibility if one can appropriate that democratization by default and provide an institutional frame, policy frame. That's what a party like Congress Party, through its social democratic frame, if it can kind of move towards that, which is what I think by default we're already seeing that shift in Congress Party, making Dalit the chief minister in Punjab and OBC chief minister in Chhattisgarh. There is also a massive, the power shift that did not happen in Congress for 70 years began to happen in the last 5 years. I think we should not miss these micro details of changes that are coming because of right wing. So it has happened through such an historical accident in this kind of extraordinary, extraneous way, is something that I think scholars of Indian politics are missing.
So thank you, Professor. Now let me go back to Sandhya Rani Bera. Okay, you may ask your
Good evening, all of you. And yeah, my question is related to, though I have been gone through every article of Sir regarding populism, Sir has circulated in class. So my question is like the about the current regime, the contemporary system, how the current regime, like the BJP is doing. I was reading a book of Christopher Jaffe led by a majoritarian state, where Suhas Palsikar has written about the psychological shelter of BJP, how it has been created a hegemony in the society. So, like for example, you have given in an article, sir. So, like how the BJP has been able to accommodate both the classes, like the upper caste and the lower caste. For example, like reservation. If you see the lower caste people, they are getting benefit by the reservation system, and if you see the upper caste people, they are getting reservation by the EW system, 10% reservation system. So this regime is accommodating both the classes, including lower caste and upper caste. So, like the hegemony is a kind of, is it in one line, is the hegemony an essential feature of populism or not?
No, but
Okay,
what do
thank
you
you.
mean by cultural hegemony? That as I explained, that certain in its overt phase, obviously, I think most populisms are have been, with an exception of Spain, have been right wing populism. Of course, we had in Latin America, India had some kind of earlier form under Mrs. Gandhi, some peasant populism, nationalism we had. So populism in the current round after neoliberalism has been more or less authoritarian, has been hegemonic, so on and so forth. But what do we mean by that hegemony? That populism is hegemonic in terms of its authoritarian element, but populism is also representing the popular everyday ethics. So, in that sense, I think it has suddenly thrown open the democracy into certain kind of a wilderness, into certain kind of an openness. Therefore, you see that impact is also felt in social sciences, that you can no longer do all kind of social sciences with sanitized, secularized, textbook definitions and categories. You'll have to catch this imagination. How is it happening? What is it that's appealing? Suddenly, you are finding things that are, that cannot be captured through our traditional categories, like centrism and institutions, so on and so forth. So I think these are all, there is something deeply democratic about it. No, equality, we all romanticize the ideal of equality, but equality is a very difficult, very injurious concept. Because when you arrive at equality, you will have to make a lot of adjustments. Equality, we will all not walk into equality, with a romantic song. Equality would mean a lot of self-injury. It would mean a lot of self-reflection. It would mean recalibrating our own selves, giving up a part of ourselves, giving up power that we enjoy in societies. Equality would mean many of these things. So I think what the populists are doing unknowingly, but I think without, in terms of because of their brazen, their unmediated kind of an idea, is that they are opening up everything that was shed, that was holy, that was sacred. They are in their brazen thing, opening up debate on everything from burqa to cow to every damn thing. So I think which is good in a democratic society. That's how let's debate it, and then we should have the competence to reappropriate them for our more egalitarian social democratic vision. There is no point in simply critiquing this as theatrics and this as rhetoric. This is how democracy works, that is to an appeal to at a mass level. So in that sense, I think Modi's figure, apart from his authoritarian, is that it brings down to the common denomination. It's a basic minimum. His appeals, his language, a common sense appeal. It's very everyday. There is no big structure of planning. There is no big structure of. So you look at even the Ukraine crisis. It is not about the history of these relations, policy, and all that. Ministers are going directly receiving. So he has made governance very lived in the way people understand. Of course, they're playing various games. That's a different thing. But that element has to be differentiated. That element that he has made governance lived from the fact that he's using it for something else are two different things. People are often confusing and making them, one and the same. That I think we should avoid.
Okay, thank you. I'm Professor Gyanranjan Swine. He wants some intervention. I mean, he has some point,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Professor Ajay, for a wonderful lecture. In fact, these days, populism as a subject, it has gathered a lot of momentum in terms of debate and discourse. And I was actually very carefully looking at, I have read your book and looking at your discussion today. But I was just wondering, how do you define the aspects of populism, particularly if you look at the nature of populism in Odisha, West Bengal, Telangana, these kind of states which has emerged, particularly the regional parties which have emerged in post 2000, after 2000. So what basically I'm trying to draw your attention, maybe I'm wrong and you can correct me, and since you are an authority on this subject, See, I think even though most of these regional parties they draw inspiration from the South Indian politics. I mean the way they have appropriated the idea of populism, but some way or the other they are different from the kind of populism that we see in South Indian states, particularly Tamil Nadu. And because I find that South Indian states they have a very clear cut ideological base, but most of the regional parties they don't have any ideological point or base, and they just bring populism to retain power at any cost. And the second difference that I find with all these regional parties, particularly Biju Janata Dal, West Bengal, and Telangana Rashtra Samiti, is that in the name of populism, the governance aspect is given more importance than the democratic aspect of society. I mean, by democratic aspect I mean that the societies there has to be debate and discussion in society, and out of debate and discussion policies have to be emerged. But I think most of these states they give more emphasis to how to for better execution of the policies than to the policies itself. So in a way, they are trying to be more and more bureaucratic. But maybe this is my observation. But sir, you are the right person to give your thought about this. And so that's why I thought I will, ask this question. So, maybe you can give your thoughts on this, sir. Thank you.
So thank
Yeah,
you, Professor Swan. Yes.
yeah, that's good. I think relevant question in terms of regional parties, which is good. That most regional parties, in this conceptual category, somewhere fit in as a populist regional parties in terms of the emotive value, symbolic value, and also so they've all formulated what I refer to as transactional welfareism. Today, if you observe in most regional parties, most states, no group goes unaddressed. There are basic minimum welfare policies for all groups. No group's claims can be completely. So we are never going to witness, old kind of. I think Partha Chatterjee makes that observation. Also, Kalyan Sanyal makes that observation in where he says there is a reversal of primitive accumulation, MNREG. So India has been anomalous that only in India perhaps welfareism grew along with neoliberalism. It's a very anomalous thing that after neoliberalism we have had massive expansion of social democratic welfare schemes from MNRG to right to food to right to work to right to information, so on and so forth. So now, how do we analyze this transactional welfareism? It's a service delivery model. As you have rightly pointed, it does not have ideological stability. Most of these regional parties can switch from Congress to BJP. They don't criticize RSS. They use Hindu symbolism. They're all neoliberal in their outlook. So all these are the problems within the neoliberal frame. Transactional welfareism, I think, is something that we need to see it as a positive step in terms of subaltern mobilization. From here, whether regional parties will be able to, what would be their character in terms of this populism, what would be its character, is a difficult thing to expect that most of the parties are switching from here to there. Federalism, for instance, has been undermined under the current regime. But my own reading has been that in course of time, since we now have opened up many of the issues, these contradictions will have an afterlife. These contradictions will get expressed in very many different ways. I mean, unless there is a massive, emergency kind of situation, if we follow this populist logic the way it is been, in the initial phase, it might look like it's all leading to authoritarianism. Regional parties are looking ineffective at the movement. There's no ideological basis. But my own hunch is that, as recently I've done a piece in Telegraph where I highlighted the contradictions within the BJP's claim. That these contradictions will sharpen. There will be more and more, like the farmers' movement. There will be more and more groups that will begin to disengage. But what they will retain is that participatory spirit, that representative spirit that this regime has introduced. So that, I think, is how I read that this will lead to some form of a new form of social and political coalitions. As I said, most important would be that I think the social question, unlike just the political, I think is going to come back in a big way, which is already visible, as I said, in the shift in the political leadership to Dalit Bahujans in Congress. It will further lead to social question of what do you do and how do we understand everyday prejudices, so on and so forth. And that can happen through a larger imagination of social solidarity. I think the extreme groups in all these formations, whether it is Muslims, whether it is Dalit Bahujans, I think will gradually get marginalized.
So thank you, Professor. Wasif, you may ask. Mr. Malik, do you want to ask?
Yeah, yes, sir. This is Wasif.
No, I can't hear you.
Hello.
Joseph, you are not audible.
Do you hear me, sir? Hello, do you hear me?
Right, yes.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible right now.
Yes, yes. Actually, Ajay sir, you have rightly pointed out. I broadly agree with your argument. The problems, the contradictions that were not addressed by the liberals earlier. Actually, the current regime is capitalizing on those contradictions and gaining legitimacy and consolidating its position. I totally agree with this argument, and this is what makes this current populism to us a kind of democratic exercise. It seems to us a kind of democratic exercise because of this thing that the current regime is actually capitalizing on those contradictions, on those contradictions which earlier liberalism has not addressed. I broadly agree with you this argument that liberalism has not been a lived reality in Indian context. It has not been the part of social fabric, and it has more. I can what Yogendra Yadav has called it. It has been a deracinated, or it has largely remained a deracinated idea in Indian context. But you are aware of this fact as well. Your solution to this problem is actually cross-cultural solidarities. I have gone through your writings on secular sectarianism, where you argue that we need to build these social solidarities in order to actually make this, populism, or make the Indian political scenario a very democratic and liberal. But state is actually having this monopoly over the power. It's actually also it's exploiting those prejudices and doesn't allow that social solidarity to emerge. So how this challenge can be addressed, how this problem can be addressed. And the second question is about there's a division within that liberal camp. Some are trying to provide solution to this problem. In a sense, they argue that we need to actually try to emphasize more on the individual rights without taking the cultural position. And I think there are you are one among them who are arguing that we need to take this memory and culture very seriously. I mean, this is how the majoritarianism actually it thrives on these aspects. It makes use of culture and memory. But what I'm saying, what's my point is, how to engage with this question of culture. This is very, in itself, engaging with this question of culture is a very problematic thing in a context which is very diverse. So how to address with this question of culture? What should be the liberal engagement with this question of culture? These are two questions. I would like to I would like to hear answer from you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malik. Please, sir.
Yeah, Tausif, you have put it very well. I think you got the core of the argument that the current, we have to make this link that current populism has not popped up from heaven. It has not dropped from heaven. It is growing on the basis of what I have referred to as secular sectarianism. It's our own sectarian mentalities, our own sectarian sentiments, our own sectarian visions, on the basis which liberalism gave it a secular color. That that each arguments like lived experience, we alone can speak. Yesterday I was at a public talk in South Asia University. I am hoping Tafsir from Kashmir. We had a Kashmiri girl very strongly arguing that nobody else can tell Muslim women whether hijab is regressive or progressive. We alone will decide. No, so these arguments and post-colonial theory intervened to convert much of hierarchies into cultural practices. They kind of projected them as neutralized cultural practices in order to project this imperialism of categories in terms of projecting them as indigenous categories. I think somewhere down the line, when this turn was happening, converting hierarchies into cultural practices, creating exclusive lived experiential discourses and neoliberalism. So if you take this entire conceptual repertoire is the basis, I would argue, for current populist authoritarianism. That people, it found legitimacy in this kind of sectarian mobilization. And what it is doing is that in order to, because it's an empty, this right-wing populism, I have argued, at the heart of it is nihilistic. It has no purpose. They don't know what they want except targeting Muslims. I mean, I don't think they have any other agenda every day taking up something. So that nihilistic, what that nihilism is doing is it has created a certain kind of brazenness to open up issues that seculars never gathered courage or had convictions. Like I said, how should one look at issue of veil? How should one see religious differences between Hindus and Muslims, so on and so forth. So what, as you said, it's not going to be easy. Cultural differences are very deep. Memories are very deep. We are a highly prejudiced society. But what I'm suggesting is that the social question has now, I think, in one sense, got foregrounded. We are no longer just discussing political or dead economic policy issues. This regime has made it very lived. This whole model of social mobilization is very lived, that everyone feels now empowered to discuss. Everyone feels empowered to argue what Indians usually do about cricket. Everyone feels an expert. Today, everyone feels an expert on Ukraine, on whale. I mean, which is good, which is in one sense a democratic spirit. I think this participatory belongingness, my larger argument, Tausif, is that is itself leads, it opens up certain possibilities. Now, what the current regime, of course, is doing is, for instance, opening these debates to humiliate Muslims, humiliate corner Kashmiris, all that they are doing. But this, I think, this loosening up in the second, third round, as I said, unless we go down, in some kind of an extraordinary model of extraordinary loss and a sustained emergency, which is also a possibility, I feel that we will, this opening up, for instance, the way of Kashmir question, I think will be addressed very differently now. This whole legitimacy of, they have successfully contributed to the collapse of, legitimacy of NC. Some of these parties that are corrupt, that have been brokers between India, they have played havoc with, the future of Kashmiris. I think now there will be more unmediated kind of discussions. That whole anxiety of Kashmir has come down with Article 370 gone. So I think it has opened up new possibilities for us to have more inclusive dialogue. So I'm not suggesting this is going to naturally happen, but it will depend on us how we appropriate that opportunity. So I think we should read the situation correctly to appropriate. And see, I'm in touch with some of the political parties, and in my course of discussion, I'm suggesting to them that they should see it through this frame. Think of, for instance, the Kashmir question very differently now in terms of how we forge larger cultural identification. It is not merely about 370, what development package, but what would cultural social identification with Kashmir and Kashmiri people mean? How should it frame? I think these are questions. Let's watch and wait and watch. My optimism will come true. As Gramsci said, optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect. So I'm avoiding the pessimism, and then I'm locating in the optimism of the will might come true. But this is not going to be natural. We'll have to appropriate. Political parties have to seize this and work towards that alternative.
Thank you. Samir, you have written a long question. So can you directly ask to our speaker? Samir, are you there?
Okay, well, hello.
Yeah.
I'm audible, sir?
Yeah,
yes,
audible.
Samir, you're audible.
Okay. Well, okay, Professor Gudavarthy, what you have said, actually, I am completely agree with your points. I mean, you have very clearly and straightforwardly articulated the whole scenario of Indian politics. Right. Look, today we are witnessing a very dangerous discourse in Indian politics. I mean, it's covered the notion, it's very, very polluting notion, which is very antithetical and negative to the idea of democracy and social fabric. The notion of Islamophobia, the notion of xenophobia, and of course the concept of anti-national, and hatred towards the particular marginalized section, hatred towards the subaltern groups. So today it becomes like a vocabulary in presentism, particularly in presentism. These ideas are, propagating. These ideas are very much propagating. So my question is like, does populism as a recent discourse in Indian politics represent a genuine voice of the masses, both subaltern group or majoritarianism? And the second question is, how far populism is different from the majoritarian doctrine? Or is it like synonyms? Okay, I just want the response from you.
Yeah, good question, Samir. So look, there is nothing like genuine representation or no, inauthentic. The point is, there was a social context. As I said, broadly, that social context can be defined as a combination of secular sectarianism and neoliberalism, and populism as right-wing populism, authoritarian, majoritarian right-wing populism seized that opportunity. That they saw that opportunity. For instance, the way they have turned the Dalit Bahujan caste question. That we all thought that traditional writers in Indian politics like Rudolph thought that the caste is a check on confessional majoritarianism, but they have completely turned it on its head. That even as they mobilize them as Dalits, they can also be Hindus. So you are Dalit for the purpose of representation, and you are a Hindu for the purpose of getting recognition. So a Dalit can have a Dalit discourse, but can also be part of the Hindu fold. So when secular discourse was so sanitized, it never saw these opportunities. It only read everything in dichotomized, binarized terms. So right wing seized that they saw that possibility, that this is possible, that you can mobilize them as Dalits, give them political representation as Dalits, but you can also inculcate and co-opt them culturally as Hindus. How many people saw this opportunity before, right? So it is not about how genuine. Therefore, we should also read that situation dispassionately and see that what are the opportunities for a left, progressive, democratic, secular, social democratic kind of an appropriation that right-wing populism might open up for us. So today, like we are seeing certain extreme versions within Dalit politics because of this appropriation business, because they feel they can share power, which is a mirage that the current regime has created. So we are seeing the kind of a pragmatic turn that Dalit Bahujan politics have taken, from annihilation of caste, to secularization, to politicization of caste. Today, it's increasingly aligning most of its anti-elitist, anti-institutional rhetoric is aligning with the right. So we have to make those readings that how those contexts are being created and what is that we can do to reappropriate, because what right is contributed towards is that in creating this generic conflict, because they hate institutions for a different reason. RSS dislikes higher education because it creates thinking mind, but they are mobilizing Dalits who have anger against the same institutions because they find them to be elitist and Brahmanical. So these two things are merging together. The Brahmanic dislike for democratic institutions, and the Dalit dislike for institutions being Brahmanical. So in India, this anti-elitist and conservative discourse actually got converged. That's the reason we have this kind of an alignment on the ground between Dalit Bahujans and the right-wing strategy. They're also speaking the local cultural idiom. So we'll have to observe these tendencies, and therefore it's not a question of genuine. The question is that by doing this, I think right wing has opened up certain questions in a different way. Now we'll have to rethink and not articulate them the way traditional political scientists, social scientists have articulated. But we'll have to articulate, as I said, pick on my entry point has been in terms of forging larger social solidarities. I've been critical of Dalit Bahujan politics that speak in sectarian language. I've been critical of conservative Muslim politics that have been that even speak in singular language. I've had critique of even movements like Shaheen Bagh, where I don't see possibilities, that they're not raising those questions of larger symbolic value of. So we have to raise these kinds of new questions, this kind of a new critique, which can break that secular sectarianism, so that the opportunities opened by right-wing populism can be seized by us towards a more social democratic kind of discourse.
So thank you. Brindavan, you have asked a question. I want you to directly ask this question to the speaker. Brindavan, are you there?
Sir, namaskar.
Namaste, Vrindavan ji.
Himanshu sir, namaskar.
Namaskar,
Sir,
namaskar.
namaskar.
You ask the question.
Uh, Sir, my question is populism is a constant threat to a genuine democracy or to a highly diversified society like India? Is it a constant threat?
Yeah, I think we have discussed it in detail that it is a threat. It is wanting to pose a threat. It's not that it is already succeeded. That is the reason I've also argued that one should not fall into this discourse of Islamophobia, because if you say India is already Islamophobic, you have already conceded. India is fairly diverse. Therefore, the populism is constructing that threat. It is not that it has already succeeded. So we'll have to also see the opportunities within the same populism. And as I've argued that there are any number of, look at the way Bahujans, OBCs have moved away from the moment they've realized that, that the chimera of opportunity of political representation, is only limited within this model. So those kind of new opportunities we'll have to seize and push in that social question harder at this moment.
So
Sir,
thank
sir,
you.
is there any constitutional framework to put an end to this nasty populism politics? Is there any constitutional mechanism?
No, as Dr. Ambedkar said, the constitutions are as good as the people who manage them. You might have whatever constitutional frame you have. That's the reason I say, cultural sociologists say that domination can be structural, but democracy has to be lived. I think Baba Sahib Ambedkar also alerted us to this, that democracy has to be a lived value. It has to be a value of civility, of politeness, reciprocity, cooperation. This cannot be institutionalized. As Dr. Ambedkar also said, no, fraternity cannot be a constitutional principle. You cannot institutionalize and say people be fraternal to each other. How does constitution create fraternity? It can only give us an institutional frame through law. But these are lived things that we'll have to struggle and build through discourses, through mobilizations, through our institutional educational institutions, so on and so forth.
So thank you,
Thank you so
sir.
much.
So thank you. I think the understanding of populism, it has not been completed yet. We have to wait. We have to wait, watch, and see. Then we have to examine. Then we have to rethink, re-theorize. So, like all other social concepts, populism is also one concept that needs introspection and re-introspection. So I think you have almost answered all the questions. So thank you, sir. Now we are at the last part of this event or web talk. Now I request my student Ipsita Das to provide vote of thanks.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible, Ipsita.
Okay, sir. First of all, I want to convey my cordial gratitude to Professor Ajay Gudavarthy sir for enlightening us. Sir, we are very fortunate to have a dogmatic personality like you as today's speaker. Thank you very much, sir, for giving us your valuable time, knowledge, and labor. Although this was an informal webinar, still you accepted our request and provided the Sanjeevani from the vast Gandhamardan of knowledge through your effective words. For this, we shall remain grateful to you forever, sir. Secondly, I would like to give...
You are making me a Hanuman. The Sanjeevani was collected by Hanuman. I don't wish to become Hanuman. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Ipsita, continue.
Secondly, I would like to give huge thanks to Dr. Himanshu Sekhar Mishra sir for convening, operating, and providing the technical assistance. Thank you very much, sir, for your disinterested support and unfathomable guidance. Again, it's my fortune to give vote of thanks to Professor Ranjan Swai sir and all other professors for their presence and for addressing their concerns on the respective topic. Again, thank you so much to our Sanjay Dada for introducing the topic in a splendid manner. Last but not the least, I want to give thanks to all the participants for their active participation and attention, and a special thanks to those who showed their great enthusiasm by asking questions and making this webinar a fruitful one. Lastly, thanks a lot to you all. Thank you.
So thank you, Ipsita. It's a wonderful vote of thanks. I really liked the way you made our speaker Hanuman. So I think what it means that, when an expert speaks, then you get to know many things even without reading. So after listening, if you will read, then you can go beyond the, speaker or author, and you can do fantastic. So thank you, sir. I think since Sanjay is working on populist politics, I think it will give a greater benefits, particularly to him and in general to all of us. And I hope that Sanjay will write a good piece of MPhil dissertation, and let's hope for the best. So thank you, sir. This is the end of this event.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you, Himanshu. It was wonderful.
again, I am on behalf of all, I am also thankful. I'm really grateful because you really accepted our, informal invitation. And I have also called Hargopal sir. He will also speak to us. So when people like you around us, I mean, academics is still alive. So it just needs some, initiatives at the personal level. So thank you, sir. I'm stopping the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye. Take care, all of you.